Welcome to Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. Earlier this month, we held our first ever private market symposium down in Charleston, South Carolina on the intermodal and logistics market. And Erin McLaughlin and our private markets team, herself, Diane Alexander, and our other staff from Washington traveled down for the event. And interestingly enough, I guess good timing is that we had the event, and Erin just released the new private market brief on intermodal and logistics. Erin, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Yes,
So,
it wasn't an accident, Jeff. So we timed it on purpose.
yeah,
Yeah,
we're crafty.
we're
We
crafty like
time
that.
everything very
So
well.
yes, we released our annual, as our some of our listeners know, we analyze five key private markets with annual briefs that take sort of a deep dive in only 4 pages into that market. And we released our brief on intermodal and logistics last week, timed, for our first ever private market symposium, which was focused on this market. And of course, we'll be doing this now throughout the year, traveling around the country, going to hot geographic areas, and having symposiums and releasing our briefs in time with those symposiums. So it was great to be in Charleston, and it's a great city, but it's also the center of a lot of activity in the Southeast regarding this market.
So tell us a little bit about the event. How was it? Who spoke? What were some of the highlights from the first symposium?
Of course. So we intend for these symposiums to be pretty intimate events. So we had about 50 attendees, and we also want them to be very client and market focused. So we really put together what I consider a great panel of clients that sort of follow the supply chain, And so what we did was we started very big picture with an economist that follows the global trade and supply chain. That was Walter Kemses. And he is the former head economist for Moffitt Nickel, which is a well known member firm that specializes in ports design. He also worked with Jones Lang LaSalle for many years, and now he's out on his own. And he gave us a really big picture on the supply chain, infrastructure, economics, and what is happening at that big picture. And then we followed that with speakers both from the Port of Savannah, which is the fastest growing port in the country, has been for quite a few years, with Chris Novak, who is their Senior Director of Engineering and Facilities Management. And we also had a speaker from the Port of Charleston, of course, and we went on a tour of that port later in the afternoon. And we rounded out with a planner, a transportation planner that specializes in freight corridors, who is from the greater Charleston area, as well as a speaker from Norfolk Southern. We wanted to make sure we got our Class 1 rail in there. And as many folks know, Norfolk Southern and CSX are the two that are the biggest players in the Southeast and really east of the Mississippi. And then we also had an industrial real estate panel discussion with with a broker, a developer, and a land use and economic development incentive attorney. And then we had our keynote speaker was Dr. Lynette Cardoche, also with Moffitt and Nickel, and she is based in Miami and specializes in resilience connected to the ports and intermodal sector. So, we sort of touched on all of the different client types within the supply chain, and within industrial real estate, and also talked about, what remains the hot topic of the day in terms of resiliency.
And you were also welcomed by the mayor
We were
of
welcomed
Charleston.
by the mayor. Um, he was very charming, and of course, he's not an engineer himself, but he talked quite a bit about how important engineering and really stormwater management and sea rise has been to the city of Charleston, and all that they're sort of doing to mitigate against future water oriented events. So it was really interesting to hear from him. And uh, there was like a very interesting theme that was sort of connected to the Dutch, that he brought up and Cardoche brought up at our lunch talk, which I thought was really funny about how, a lot of the designs that we're doing in our coastal cities in the U.S. Are really connected to, how to live with water, how to live so close to the water, and how to work so close to the water. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Charleston always. I mean, it seems like whenever you have these days at least, a bad rainstorm, the promenade and the area down by the waterfront and the Battery always floods.
Right.
So
yeah.
flooding, yeah, it's always a concern. So it was good to have the mayor out, and of course our CEO Linda Bauer-Dar
Yeah.
was there as well, and some members from, of course, ACEC South Carolina, and Melvin Williams, one of
Yes.
our vice chairs, Tara Khan, was there. So great event. I mean, this is a perfect example of going out to the areas where we have a focus with these private markets, and holding an event where we bring together speakers and thought leaders. And this isn't theoretical stuff. These are experts talking to the business community in these areas. It's actionable information.
Right. I mean, one of the great things about the event was sort of the passion that all of our speakers had for the trends that are happening. So, and these are obviously very well connected to the trends that we laid out in the brief. So I thought maybe I would take a few moments just to
Yeah,
go through the 5 trends and sort of
absolutely.
hit on some of the key points. For anyone that couldn't make the symposium, I encourage you to go ahead and download the brief. It's now on acec.org under business resources. You'll see private markets, and then all of our briefs are posted, including this one on intermodal logistics. And so, such as with all of our briefs, we go through and we highlight what we think are the 5 most significant trends that are impacting the market right now. And obviously, this market is, I mean, when you turn on the business news, you even turn on regular news, this is what you hear. You open the newspaper, you call up your newspaper online. So, we have a really, really compromised supply chain right now. And that sort of pressure related to the supply chain is largely due to labor, right? Because we have a truck driver shortage, which is, hurting the port's ability and, the ability to sort of get freight moving at a fast pace. But, some of this can be helped by infrastructure design, and some of this can be helped by technology because, people and workers are finite. So, we have to do everything we can. So it was just really, really interesting to hear some of the creative solutions, particularly from our ports folks, that they are doing. I was really struck by Chris Novak with the Savannah Port describing how they have designed their tracks so that both CSX and Norfolk Southern can operate essentially on the same 9 track beds that they split between the two. I believe it was 9. And so, if one is, so they have to, rail companies often were sort of like, as Chris said, cats and dogs. So this sort of forces them to work together, right? And and then all over the country, we've seen with the IIJA, aka our infrastructure bill, which is now law, that there are definitely some measures in there that will also help keep freight moving. One of them is there are several points in the US. They don't exist in the Southeast, but there's one in Baltimore. There's a couple other points in the US where we have a double stack issue related to freight rail. So we have tunnels that really only accommodate a single stacked train. And we all know how expensive it is to redesign and reconstruct a tunnel, especially in some of these urban areas. But, hopefully we will see some of that resolved, which will open up a couple of the bottlenecks in the U.S. as well. And then, of course, besides freight rail, our other bottlenecks, besides the ones actually at the port, are connected to, roadways. And, in the brief, just like we did in the previous issue, we feature the top 10 truck bottlenecks in the U.S. So,
Yeah. Big surprise number 1, Fort Lee, New Jersey,
yes.
I-95, Service Route 4. Average speed, 36.5 miles an hour. peak average speed 31 miles an hour.
Now, Jeff, this is the second time I have done this table. So this year, we obviously it's 2021, so we don't have data for this calendar year yet. We had 2020, but the previous time I had done this table, it had 2019 data,
Yeah.
and the miles per hour were so much slower. So believe it or not, even though
Things
this
have
looks
gotten
pretty
better.
bad because of the pandemic, it actually got a little bit better in 2020. But as those of us that are out driving again and fully engaged into life, we're gonna have the traffic has resumed. So I expect
Yeah.
next year when I do this table, the numbers will be even lower than they are
Absolutely.
here. But
I think that, you look at the chart and it kind of makes, okay, you see Fort Lee, New Jersey, Cincinnati, Ohio, actually number 2, number 3 and 4, Atlanta, Georgia. Congratulations to
right.
take those spots.
And it was interesting when Chris Novak with the Georgia Ports Authority got up and was talking about the Savannah port. I was very proud because he actually took the brief up with him and pointed out these two bottlenecks that are, upchain from the port of Savannah, and how, they recognize that. And that's in part why they're creating inland ports, which is something that, a lot of our members have become familiar with. And a lot of these quote unquote inland ports are not connected to water. So they're really about where bringing rail service, from the coastal cities up into freight corridors served by highways and freeways that can take some more trucks off the road and make the supply chain a little bit more seamless. So I thought that was really important. And, our speakers also did an excellent job in sort of, when I was prepping them, I said, please do not show us pictures of all the beautiful projects that you have done. As a former business development director, we don't want to see that. We want to see what your plan is in the future, what is growing. And so I encourage our members to come to future symposiums because that's where you hear from these clients about what's going to happen, right? Not just what happened. So I thought it was great that that Chris Novak shared with us, which inland ports and which, much further up the chain. Same thing for our folks that came from the South Carolina Ports Authority, what kind of growth that they would see in the quote unquote hinterlands, and that for us, those are opportunities that are connected both, for class 1 rail, also potentially through, departments of transportation, and also with logistic companies that own a lot of these big sites at these inland ports and, in these industrial real estate parks that we see.
Yeah, I found it interesting when news of supply chain disruptions really started picking up, and the Secretary Buttigieg, started talking about these pop-up distribution centers away from the ports to kind of help take some of the pressure off the transportation systems. I mean, essentially, those are pop-up versions of what we need. Those inland ports, those inland distribution centers away from the water that can take a lot of that cargo and freight and get it away from the ports and put it onto highways and rail systems, away from the choke points. And it's good to see that seems to be a focus of development of the future port infrastructure extending beyond the actual physical port into these inland ports.
Right. And, as we change demographically, there's two or three things that have really caused very significant growth. One is the opening of the Panama Canal, and many people have often heard me say that, it just really opened about 6 or 7 years ago. So, we're still feeling the ripple effects of that. So now, the ports in the Gulf and in the southeastern part of the US are better prepped, to take in those much larger ships, with all of the container vessels. And so that has created that ripple effect that we see. At the same time, demographically, it is the Sunbelt region of the US that is really experiencing, it's all of our markets are kind of tied together. So like when we talk about the residential market, for example, which is so hot, 25% growth year over year, the states that are really seeing that growth are the Sun Belt, right? So basically from like the mid-Atlantic down through Texas over to Arizona. So, when you think about where the people are moving, that e-commerce, which is one of the key, the key trends that we've seen over the last few years, accelerated by the pandemic, that people are ordering things that they never ordered online, groceries, food, the need for cold storage, then the needs for last mile, quote unquote, delivery. So if you want things 1 day, 2 days shipping, you need these urban warehouses to exist, that need to be closer to cities and where the people live and where the demographic pull is. And so all of these things have sort of combined to make for a really growing market. And one of the trends that we point out is that industrial real estate, again, not the sexiest market, is the for the ninth year running, according to the ULI PricewaterhouseCoopers Emerging Trends in Real Estate annual report, for the ninth year running is the hottest real estate market sector. So, vacancy rates are basically at 1%. They're below 5% in almost every market in the United States. In New York and Los Angeles, the greater New York and Los Angeles, Inland Empire, New Jersey, etc. markets, they're almost at 0%. And you just cannot find warehouse space to put stuff that we need, in place for this sort of just in time delivery that we have all become accustomed to. And it's a really strong example of how our human behavior really does impact the design of our infrastructure.
Yeah, and especially when you start looking at that distribution of population into the Sun Belt, and that's where like you mentioned, the fastest growing areas of commercial and residential real estate. I mean, that is largely because people are trying to get out of more densely populated areas and get some more space.
Right.
The problem is that last mile delivery, that becomes a longer mile
Yes.
because you have a longer area. I mean, you look at Texas, that's a country in its own. So when you
Right.
talk about creating supply chains to fulfill that customer demand, you need that warehouse infrastructure to be able to get products to where they can actually get that last mile delivery and
Right.
have that quick delivery over longer periods of distance. And that's where, yeah, that's that, like you said, that infrastructure is going to be shaped around where people are going, and that's going to really determine what is surrounding them for logistics.
I thought it was also very interesting. One of our trends that we call out in the brief is the changing warehouse. And we had an industrial real estate panel at our symposium, and we talked a little bit about, many folks may think it's very easy to design a warehouse or an industrial property because they're sort of imagining a greenfield, a big site. But in fact, because they are getting more urban, they can be very, very challenging, And so when these clients that we had discussed working with engineering firms, one of the key things they said was, it was twofold. It was about how the site has to be designed for trucks to come in and out, to turn around, to have ease of right turns, right away, etc. But the other thing that was really interesting that we're hearing more about is in part because of the labor shortage and the need to attract workers, both as truck drivers and as warehouse workers, making the facilities nicer. One of our panelists said, having bathrooms, that are accessible for the truck drivers to pull when they pull into a warehouse, that they are able to come in, and maybe have an air conditioned space to cool off, have restrooms to use. And that even goes to, many analysts in this market are predicting that warehouses will have to get a little nicer, a little fancier. They're going to have to be air conditioned. They're going to have to be attractive so that people want to come to work and want to continue to work in that facility. And they're also going to have to become very sort of clean and technologically smart, because there's so many robots and so much technology that is being introduced into these building types because of the labor shortage, and the Amazons and the others that are playing in this market are really pushing how far they can use for lack of a better word, robots and machinery to do the jobs that, people would have done very, very recently. So it was really interesting to hear about that. And Walter Kemsey is our economist when he opened up, and he was sort of describing some of these very futuristic trends, discussed how frankly frightening some of these robots are that are occupying the warehouses, and what they are actually doing, and that they're not perfect and they often make mistakes. So it's an industry that's transforming, and it's out of necessity.
Absolutely. And then you notice, I mean, these are big cost centers for a lot of these companies.
Yeah.
And if you're a large retailer and you're operating a number of warehouses and you also have to hit corporate marks for environmental,
Yes.
cleanliness and responsibility, that's a big area where you can help make a dent there. So these facilities also have to be designed with a greater eye towards reducing carbon emissions,
Right.
a smaller environmental footprint, so that it's a net cost savings to the company regarding overhead, but also that it makes it a little bit more attractive for local communities to welcome in a warehouse if you can make the case that you're doing it in an environmentally friendly and conscious
Right.
manner.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of this stuff is not in my backyard. A lot of folks do
Yeah.
not want, even obviously we need them in more urban locations. A lot of folks do not want a warehouse or distribution center or somewhere where trucks are going to be pulling in and out. So, yeah, I mean, that's definitely a challenge. It's really interesting because as some of our listeners and readers know, we're tracking very closely much of ACEC, much of our staff in DC is tracking ESG, and what ESG will mean, environmental, social, and governance sort of requirements, which are now largely voluntary for Fortune 500 and other companies, but we do expect within the coming year or two will be required and are becoming required for government contractors. And we expect that the SEC and some other federal agencies and administration will continue to push this. And the two biggest carbon emitters are buildings and transport. So when a company looks to their supply chain and looks to how to reduce emissions, they are looking at the parts of the world that we design, buildings and
Hmm.
transport. So, there's certainly opportunities there for us, and it's also important to know, I sort of call out in our brief that is really part of the continued growth of freight rail.
Yeah.
You can move a lot on very little with very little emissions on rail
Hmm.
compared to trucks. So,
Yeah.
it's interesting to see how that growth of freight rail will continue as companies try to think about how they can basically green their supply chain as close as they can to try to get to net zero.
Yeah, there's a lot. I really encourage everyone to take a look at this brief because there's a lot of great information here, and it covers a lot of ground. We've covered a lot of the main points, the big top five, but just the graphs that kind of detail, port growth, the fastest growing ports, the expenditures on class one rail, and just a number of other things. I mean, it's a great brief to have on hand to help you better understand this market. And go over to acec.org, business resources. You'll see the private markets page, and you can download the brief right there. You'll also see right on the top of the page a link to our symposium series. And it's never too early to start talking about the next one, which is coming up actually in the spring. It's going to be in March, and it's going to be on the commercial and residential real estate market in Scottsdale, Arizona. Aaron, can you give
Yeah.
us kind of a preview of what to expect from that event?
Absolutely. So, knowing that the Sun Belt is the fastest growing region of the U.S., we decided to have our event in Scottsdale, and it's also, who doesn't want to go to Arizona in the winter? So, bring your golf
Right?
clubs if you want to join us. And similar to the symposium we just held, we will have a cocktail reception on the Thursday night, March 3rd, and then almost full day of programming on Friday. So we are going to really highlight some of the big trends that we are seeing. We're going to talk to clients, in the commercial and residential real estate markets, and we're also going to tackle some trends. So, we're going to talk about the heat island effect, what it's like to design in a hotter environment. We're going to also explore mass timber and how that is going to be used in commercial real estate, largely because the code that changed earlier this year, and our ability to maybe capture some carbon by using different materials. So it's going to be very exciting, and then for the one we just had in Charleston, we topped our day off with a tour of the port, which was really amazing. It was, if anyone is ever has the opportunity to go and walk beneath these cranes and to get up in them and to really experiencing it, it was wonderful. But we obviously will not be going to a coastal port in Scottsdale, but we will also be having probably a hard hat tour. We're sort of in development of that, but of a very interesting building in the Phoenix area on that Friday afternoon to close us out.
Yeah, it sounds like a great event. I mean, the first one was fantastic. It brought a cross section of the business community in the Low Country together to talk about a very important topic. We expect the one in Scottsdale on commercial and residential real estate to do the same. And again, these are designed for people who are engaged in engineering and in the business community. We're not talking academic stuff here. We're actually talking about usable business information, trends, and industry developments that help in business development and just getting a better sense about what the regional economy is doing. So if you are a leader in the engineering space, in the real estate space, in the Sun Belt, in Scottsdale, in Arizona, really encourage you to take a look at the website and all the information for registering for the event. It's going to be a good time.
Yes, it will. We look forward to seeing folks. And of course, if anyone has any questions, they can certainly drop me an email. My contact information is on our private markets resources page.
Next up, we'll be doing our December economic report.
Yes.
So stay tuned for that. That will be our next
offer.
Video coming out.
Yes.
Will be our December economic report. So really looking forward to that. Aaron, thank you as always for coming on the show and providing some of your expertise on a very important segment of what ACEC does, and that is the private market. People like to look at ACECs and say, oh, well, you guys just do infrastructure. Not true. We have a big focus on the vertical markets, on private markets, and the firms that do business in them. And the proof is here with the briefs and with all the work that Erin and her team is doing to get this information out to you. So thank you again, Erin, for being part of the program. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
And again, this has been Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. We'll see you real soon.